Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, we talk Ethernet switches and wireless APs with sponsor Fortinet. Yes, Fortinet. Best known for firewalls and other security products, Fortinet has a full line of switches for the campus and data center, as well as a robust portfolio of wireless APs. And Fortinet is here to make the case as a switching and wireless player. We'll talk about how its products converge networking, security, and more. Our 40 guests are Chris Hinz, Senior Director, Product and Solutions, Secure Connectivity, and James Allen, Director of Product Marketing and Solutions, LAN Access, and Zero Trust. Chris and James, welcome to the podcast. Let's jump right into it. Why is Fortinet in the switching and wireless business?
Fortinet has always had this vision of the importance of bringing networking and security together, really needing to converge these two things to ensure that you have the most secure network possible. As you highlighted earlier, being a security company, we take security of all forms very seriously. So we really wanted to ensure that we could build the most secure, easy, and intelligent network possible.
What does the convergence of security and networking mean to Fortinet, and how is that sort of manifested then?
So really what it represents is actually integrating our wired and wireless equipment directly into the core operating system that really drives what we call our security fabric, our platform. So when we look at our wired and wireless networking equipment, it's an extension, say, of FortiOS, which runs on every FortiGate next generation firewall we ship. And what it does is it allows us to do some things that other vendors are unable to do, as far as things like visibility, things like being able to take segmentation and microsegmentation all the way down to the switch port level and so on.
So this is not a third-party switch wireless access point ecosystem. This is Fortinet's own gear.
That is correct. And in fact, that also differentiates us from many, because it's not something, for example, with our switches, these are developed by us. They are our switches. They're not switches that we are, taking from another vendor. For us, we actually developed our switches first as an extension for the FortiGate next generation firewall. As you can imagine, you can't have a firewall with 48 ports. And so what we looked at is how do we actually enable those ports as if they're firewall ports. And so we started really with our Access series of switches. These are more entry-level switches, 1 gig, also multi-gig entry-level switches, and then began to broaden that out going into the campus core, and even to the data center with some of our higher speeds, 10, 25, 100 gig switches. We also actually have a ruggedized line as well, designed not only, typically you hear it associated with OT, but in fact, any environment where a standard switch, a carpeted safe switch, is just not going to be okay in that environment.
So there is a different switch lines then, it sounds like. We've got different products aimed at different parts of the network. If I wanted to put Fortinet switches in my data center, you'd have products for that versus the closet versus other places.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they are broken up into what amounts to be an access level, which is kind of more of our entry level. But these also are applicable to, say, for example, branch, campus. Campus core and data center are kind of synonymous for us. And those are the higher speeds that you kind of spoke of that would be basically sitting top of rack or data center. And then the ruggedized OT has been an area we've been investing in heavily here over the last several years.
So the ruggedized for operational networks, that is stuff that's going to be in harsh environments, and so it's got the special casing and all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly it. So we're talking about typically DIN-REL switches, so they fit in a very compact space. They're fanless. They're typically IP rated. So they're designed to go into harsh environments, manufacturing environments, oil and gas, water treatment plants, that type of thing, specific OT environments. But also, on a side note, you often see ruggedized equipment, say, in restaurants, right, where there might be a high amount of dust or something else that may affect regular Ethernet switches. Ruggedized switches actually can be placed in those environments as well.
Grease, James. It's grease in restaurants.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it. But the grease and flour and things like that, they don't do well for standardized switching.
For sure. So getting under the hood a little bit, Fortinet's known, one of the things you're known for is developing your own ASICs for your firewall line. What are we looking at under the hood in the switch portfolio? Are you merchant silicon? Are you building your own?
We're not necessarily developing specific ASICs for our switching line, because in the way that our switches interact with FortiOS, really a lot of the intelligence is sitting there at the FortiOS level. That doesn't mean that the switches themselves are not as capable or have the same type of capabilities that you would see from any other vendor switch. But it does enable us to, when we're looking at our customized ASICs, to really still focus on what's driving FortiOS, which is the FortiGates and the FortiGate hardware.
Okay, so if I was to open a box, I'd probably see some merchant silicon in my switch.
You would probably see some merchant silicon in.
Although, to be fair, James, it is true that because of this way that we work together, the switches and the APs with the FortiGate, we have put controls into our custom silicon within the FortiGate to facilitate those connections and ensure that those FortiGates can pick up and manage all these devices without an overall impact to the firewall.
That's a great point, Chris. I mean, when we start to look at what we're really doing here and having FortiOS really be the controller for our switching and for our wireless, we have built specific capabilities within the FortiGate to be able to support that. So when we talk about the custom ASICs and when we talk about just the control for wired and wireless networking, just as Chris says, there's pieces in there that are developed specifically to support what we call FortiLink, which is our control process for the switches and the APs.
So we talked about the Ethernet switches. Let's get into access points. Can you tell us what's in the portfolio? And given the time we're recording in November 2024, Wi-Fi 7 is emerging. Are you supporting Wi-Fi 7?
Yes, actually, Fortinet was an early producer of Wi-Fi 7 into the enterprise market. We had our initial Wi-Fi 7 APs actually released and in market at the beginning of 2024. I know, there's always that game of announcing and then when does the hardware actually show up? But we actually had units produced and in market in Q1 of 2024. So we really believed and continue to push that standard forward and make that available to our customer base. We have pretty much the full line of access points I think most people usually look for. Your traditional, indoor internal antennas, aesthetically pleasing, put it up on the ceiling. People mistake it for a smoke detector type of AP. We do also offer, external antenna ones for folks who need to do some cabling or otherwise need that range of pattern that comes with being able to leverage external antennas. And of course, we have a portfolio of external antennas that can be matched up with our APs. We also offer, your wall plate style that can actually be mounted directly onto like a junction box. We tend to see those more in hospitality, but I've even seen them in other locations, some types of stores or any place where they have this, they're really going for an aesthetic and they really just don't want the AP to really be visible at all. They want to be able to hide it down on a junction box somewhere under a table and then nobody sees it because they'll just assume that, I guess, the Wi-Fi is magically appearing. I don't know.
It's just there in the air. Although I think our audience is the type who likes to go into an environment and play spot the AP. So
yeah, and find the right spot, spot the AP.
Yeah.
But just like James was talking about, doing more ruggedized switching, we do have a full line of IP67 access points. So fully ruggedized for outdoor environments or freezers or anything like that. And we have also, within the last 12 months, we have introduced a C1D2 certified access point. So we can move into oil and gas environments, places where you need to ensure that that device is not going to create spark.
Okay.
Now, just like your Ethernet switches are your own design, are these APs your own design? I ask that because there's a lot of complexity that goes into an access point, especially with as modern Wi-Fi, all the different radio frequencies and antenna design and so on. There's a lot to it that goes in those APs.
Yeah, of course, just I think similar to switching where we do leverage a contract manufacturer to actually build these things. We have an engineering group internally that is responsible for working with some of these chipset providers on the radio side to build out what we want this AP to look like. So this is not just going shopping, as it were, off the shelf, somewhere in those places that produce these things and just saying, yeah, give me that one. we are involved in the design of these APs to ensure that they can deliver what we want them to be able to deliver.
Are there particular verticals you're targeting for the Ethernet portfolio? Or I guess, to put it another way, who's buying switches from a firewall vendor?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In particular, we've been mentioning OT as a vertical that we are focused on, not just within the Ethernet portfolio, but just as a company, we've been very much focused on OT over the last several years. But where we see there's not a particular vertical, but we do see applications, particularly for the distributed enterprise. So the distributed enterprise could be anything from a retail establishment all the way up to, say, for example, insurance or banking, where you're going to have a variety of different sites. The reason why there's such an interest for them is because of the simplicity of management and the integration directly into FortiOS, which also powers not only our security, but things like SD-WAN for us. And what that does is it gives our customers a solution that is more or less an end-to-end, particularly within a distributed enterprise. That said, we also get deployed in campus applications, and as you can imagine, every vertical has a campus or a headquarters, and so we see deployments there as well. But there's not say, for example, we focus specifically on oil and gas, or we focus specifically on hospitality or something along those lines. We really look at the deployment types, and those deployment types across multiple verticals, across multiple industries.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys mentioned along the way here that the switches and APs are also running FortiOS. So if I'm a Fortinet user and I'm used to FortiOS, it's going to be the same thing that I'm used to on these switches and APs. Okay, how do I translate that into my network operations? What does this feel like? Is there like separate management tooling that I'm using for the switching and the AP infrastructure versus firewalls?
So that's a great question. One of the things that James was just alluding to that a lot of our customers have really valued is that the management of the switch and the APs is done directly in the FortiGate firewall. And for anybody listening, if you're familiar with a FortiGate interface, if you've used one in the past, you know that that menu that extends down on the left-hand side has all the different categories of things on your firewall. Keep scrolling on down, you'll notice that there is wireless and switch management tucked in there as one of the options. So you have this benefit of and this is where we have really found so much growth, is for anybody out there who is familiar with FortiGate, you're actually familiar with a Fortinet switch and wireless controller because it's right there built in, same level of controls. In fact, when you are configuring security for those switch ports or for your wireless SSIDs, those things will show up in the FortiGate interfaces screen. So it's not even like you're going down a completely separate rat hole to go do this. You've already been using the interfaces screen on your FortiGate to assign all your security policies right for those front ports on the front of your gate. Now you keep scrolling down. Hey, there's your FortiSwitch ports. Assign your security policies the same way you were before. Keep scrolling down. Hey, those are your SSIDs. So you're already leveraging, for anybody who's touched a FortiGate, and we ship a lot of FortiGates, that's going to be a lot of your listeners, it's leveraging the same UI people are already familiar with and the same tools for config, particularly around the security settings that they're already doing.
So there's a different way to think about this, though, from an engineering perspective. I'm used to built a lot of networks, and the security domain and the switching domain tended to be separate things. They met in the middle somewhere, but they were separate environments you managed, and there was different thinking processes that go. It feels like with this way of thinking about it, you're building a unified infrastructure and deploying a unified security policy across these devices, and that sharp divide between this is a firewall that's managed like this, these are switches that are managed like this, that begins to go away.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I mean, now that said, we do have some of our larger enterprises where they still are somewhat siloed, and you have the ability to be able to designate, just as you would imagine, these functionalities are being able to be managed by this team, these functionalities are being able to be managed by that team. One thing I will add in there, Chris was mentioning being able to manage directly out of the within FortiOS directly on the FortiGate. you can actually begin to manage at scale when you start to look at things like our FortiManager. And FortiManager is a manager of FortiOS, and it's utilizing and connecting to FortiOS. So when you push out the configurations or do configuration changes or troubleshooting, you actually have the ability to look at multiple FortiGates. So in the example where I gave, where it's a distributed enterprise where there may be hundreds or thousands of sites that you need to deploy, orchestrate, manage, optimize all of those day 0 or day 1 to day 3 operations, you're more than likely doing that through FortiManager, because you're not going to want to directly log into each individual FortiGate. It would be just too onerous. But you have the ability there to be able to have just that single config in the FortiGate that has all those items that you discussed, Ethan, where you're looking at the switching, the wireless, the obviously the security, even NAC functionality is built in there, because as a layer 7 firewall, we see everything coming through and can profile and onboard things.
Well, this does bring us to the end of our time, but if we've piqued listeners' interest in finding out more about the switches and the APs that are in the Fortinet portfolio, where should they go?
They can go to fortinet.com/LAN edge. That's all together, just LAN edge. And they will be able to find more details specific around our Ethernet switching and Wi-Fi access points.
All right, that's fortinet.com/LAN edge. We'll have that link and others in the show notes that accompany this podcast. Thank you, Chris and James, for joining us. And thanks to sponsors. Sponsors make everything that we do here at Packet Pushers possible. The other people who make it possible are you, the listener. Thank you for being here with us. If you like this episode, you can find this and many more fine, free technical podcasts along with our community blog. It's all at packetpushers.net. You can follow Ethan and I on Blue Sky. You can hear us on Spotify. And if you would, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.